Welcome to the ESPN post-race show, Belgian GP, last GP before the summer break. Tyler Denning, Spencer Hall, Tim Hauraney, taking you through the conclusion of this race. Guys, it's been quite the week, jam-packed with the sprint race. We've seen a lot of rain. There was just a little bit of rain during the race today that led to some intrigue. But once again, it's Red Bull dominance up front. Max Verstappen. The margin last year was 18 seconds victory coming from behind. He starts in sixth place, and it looks like he's well on his way to, I'm checking the timing, looking to my left, 20 seconds right now. Wow.
Not bad.
Good day at the office.
Seems fine. We do have to do this thing every week, right? Let's just start at the top. Yeah, Max Verstappen's awesome. They're awesome. we get to see it again. Historical dominance. 13th race, I believe, in a row that they've won with Verstappen behind the wheel. Now we could talk about all the other stuff, right?
Yes, absolutely. So there's plenty of other to talk about. McLaren. Oh, we got to play a song for McLaren. What a poor way to go into the break after all the momentum that they have built up over the last 4 weeks.
Yeah, big time. I mean, I think going on that lower downforce setting that they decided to take on for this weekend helped within the shootout, and in the sprint, but I mean, not so much in this race, just going completely backwards for Lando Norris and obviously Oscar Piastri getting that damage at the start of this one. I mean, tough. I mean, this is a team that's made up, over a second probably in lap delta when it comes to their upgrades that they've brought to this car. And if you take a look at where they were at the start of the season in Bahrain, they were absolutely nowhere. And I think just seeing the shift in terms of performance, it shows you that these regulations can work for sure. But on the flip side of that, I've never seen a team actually make that big of a jump in lap delta within a season. It's absolutely incredible to watch.
Tim, I had a question for Tim. Do you think this was a track where we were going to see this anyway out of McLaren? I don't think was Spa a bad fit for that car at this point in the season.
I don't necessarily think so, because it's all down to how they set this car up for this weekend. And since everybody entered Parc Fermé after FP1, they had so much downforce just tacked onto this car that helps them in certain parts of this racetrack, but it also hinders them in a lot of the big performance parts of the track as well. And I think that right there is essentially what has happened with McLaren here this weekend. It was interesting when I went to the British Grand Prix and talking with Andrea Stella, and him just telling us that they were actually kind of surprised about the performance at the British Grand Prix. But the temperature, it was nice and cool there. The track, they were really fast and high-speed corners. That's what this new aero package that they've added to this car does for them. But outside of that, going to Hungary, they were like, hey, we don't know what's going to happen here. We're probably not going to do that well. The temperatures there in Hungary, they're always brutal. It's always really hot. The track is tight and twisty, so it's hard for them to actually get a lot of performance out of the car. And lo and behold, we get to Hungary, and they're really fast. And so for them, that was a bit of a shock. And so heading into Spa, Spencer, I think for them, the mindset was, hey, let's just try and get as many points as we can. Let's try and get into that top 10 in battle. But when you look at what happened with that sprint yesterday, Oscar Piastri is fantastic. And I think that's a driver that we haven't really, discussed enough lately. And hopefully we'll get to a little bit more of that in the show.
Well, Max Verstappen just crossing the finish line to make it 13 straight for Red Bull. Now, Max Verstappen, he has equaled Fernando Alonso career record with wins from 9 different grid positions. You put him wherever he can win. Perez is across the line. Guys, how about the drama at the end here? Yuki in the points. Come on, Yuki. Get it across his 10th. Do it.
It's my dude. That's my dude.
As much drama as we can squeeze out of this one here at the end, looking further down. And what a race, what a weekend for Yuki it would be if he can finish here in the points.
Absolutely. It's been an incredible story, Spencer. Yeah, for Yuki, I think I think we can't talk enough of just how important of a season this is for him, entering his 3rd season. He doesn't have a contract for next year just yet. And for him, has to perform. And then you get Daniel Ricciardo, who gets parachuted in for the Hungarian Grand Prix. And I think for Yuki, it's that mentality of I've got to make a statement here and show that I belong.
Spencer, you want to jump in? I know you're a Yuki fan.
I can talk about Yuki all day. Thank you so much. No, I'm just thrilled for him because we have to remember every driver has a different set of goals. When they were talking to Williams mid-race, I love things like this about the broadcast that, you talk to James Voles mid-race and he says, well, we got Albon up to 9th, we got him up to 10th, and that's probably where we'll stop. They know what drivers do and how well they do on a curve. For Yuki, it's getting points is nice. Beating Daniel Ricciardo after having Ricciardo beat him last week, that's huge, I think, both for his confidence and for his relative performance. All performances are relative if you're not Max Verstappen or maybe Mercedes or Ferrari. And in this case, it's a really good relative performance for Yuki Tsunoda. I think he's one of those drivers where if we say, I take this guy and I put him in a better car, he'll be as good as X, right? He'll be a top 5 driver. I think he's one of those guys. He just needs the right car. It's like him, Alex Albon. Those are the two guys that I think of, and maybe both Alpine drivers, because we'll talk more about Alpine, but like there are a number of guys who in the midst of team chaos are just clocking in and doing a solid job every week, no matter who owns the team, no matter who just got fired. And those are the drivers for Alpine. But in summary, yes, great race for Yuki. Keep it up. I hope he gets a better car somewhere.
I think
the cars
just
pits now. Race is over officially. Tim, I'll hit him with the top 10 here: Verstappen, Perez, Leclerc, Hamilton, Alonso, Russell, Norris, Ocon, Stroll, and Tsunoda. That's your 1 through 10 Belgian GP over. It is now the summer break, so we have 4 weeks to break everything down that we have seen across the first half of the year thus far. Tim, go back ahead with the point you were going to make.
Yeah, I just want to circle back on Yuki real quick. I mean, it kind of shows us that, if you give drivers a long enough time with this new formula, because it is a challenging formula for a lot of rookie drivers to learn. And so for Yuki, obviously entering that 3rd year, it's always something that we have discussed, where how many years does it take for a young driver to actually get to grips and show what they can do in a Formula One car. And I think sometimes we're a little bit too quick to judge on younger drivers, kind of getting the hook early. I think for Yuki, he's kind of that, if he's able to keep this performance trend going, I think he is that perfect example of, you just need to give some drivers a bit of time with the regulation to learn everything, to then show what they can do so they can go and execute. And so that's just my big thing when it comes to younger drivers. And, we had Nick DeVries. Obviously he's not really a rookie, but for myself, I think him getting the hook that early, I think they still should have seen what he could have done. But granted, having Dan Ricciardo back on the grid is a pretty cool thing too. So
you talk young drivers, no better younger driver pairing than McLaren and what they have right now, really making waves with Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri. That conversation now, who the better driver is between those two. But let's go back to that McLaren weekend a little bit. Obviously a bad taste to go into the summer break, but I think if you're a McLaren fan, if you are McLaren, you're very happy with the momentum that you have built over the last month and a half. You look at all the points that they have hauled over the last 4 or 5 races to try to nudge that up. But what's the state of McLaren? Do you say positive right now, going in, neutral, or concern based on the result from this week?
I think it's positive, considering, like I had said a bit earlier, like where they've actually had to come from and to claw back as much performance as they have done this season. When we sat in with a press conference with Zach Brown and Andrea Stella back in the wintertime, they delivered it straight to us. Like, hey, this is going to be a rough start to the season here, guys. Like we don't know what we got. And then sure enough, we get to the test, there's parts falling off the car and it just wasn't performing at all. And then as we get deeper into this season and they bring a huge upgrade for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, and then they bring another one after that, and they're expected to have another big upgrade coming after the summer break as well. I think for this team, I think eventually they can be fighting for that, third, fourth, maybe even push to second in the constructor standings because of just how much performance they've been able to drag out of this race car.
It's extraordinary what they've managed to do in season, tweaking the car. McLaren has been making good hires on the back end, on the technical end. And I think you've started to see that show up. Don't forget, this is a sport that's basically a 90% engineering exhibition and a 10% racing exhibition. We get to watch the 10%, but that 90%, McLaren's been pushing, and they've been pushing hard. And if you kind of want some perspective on how much improvement they've done and how remarkable that is, compare them to what we've seen out of teams that have also had change mid-season. Compare them to Mercedes, compare them to Aston Martin, and the varying performances of those cars. We, at the beginning of the season, lauded Aston Martin for making a huge leap, which they did. They have. It's still, I don't want to diminish that, but relative to what McLaren has managed to do, it's a drastic difference because Aston Martin has kind of plateaued, even maybe fallen off a little bit relative to their competition. McLaren keeps getting better. This is a hiccup. And it's a hiccup that, yes, was influenced by a crash on the track. Okay, you have a crash, you have some damage. That's going to happen. Don't let that cloud what they've done. Keep your eye on the ball here. They've done so many good things on the back end. They have more time to do that. If they have more upgrades coming and they implement them as well, you're right. They're a top 3 team.
Here's the $1 million question. We saw Oscar Piastri, first rookie to lead a race. Granted, it was the sprint since Esteban Gutierrez. That was in 2013 at the Spanish GP. We've seen Norris lead the race at Silverstone. We saw him it was crushing to watch him in Russia when he led the race. Look at these two drivers. Who breaks through first?
That's a really great question.
You gotta tell me. You gotta pick a side here. Who breaks through first and gets the race win? Does it happen this year, and who would it be?
Yeah, I think it's going to be Lando Norris, just based on the experience factor. I mean, Oscar has shown an incredible ability, and I think if you take a look at that sprint race on Saturday, that's just a bit of little more learning that he needs to do with the tire and how that particular tire degrades within the race, and then how much can he actually push on that tire before the degradation actually sets in. So for Oscar, I think the only thing at this moment that's really just holding him back from taking that next jump is a little bit of learning and a tiny bit of experience. But, speaking with Lando back at the British Grand Prix, he was telling me that, he's never really been pushed this hard by a teammate like that before. Like Oscar is a true talent, and he's won championships in all of the lower categories, which is a really tough thing to do. So, you've got something special there. I just think Lando takes it based on the fact that he has more Formula One experience.
That's a really sensible and very well thought out and knowledgeable opinion. But I'm going to say Piastri, and I'm going to base it on a large cliche, which I think is true. I think the dude has it. I think sometimes he doesn't know he's not supposed to be competing, if that makes any sense. Sometimes he just finds himself running in the top 4, running in the top 3 on the kind of enthusiasm and talent that you can only have when you don't know what you're doing, right? Like, I think I think that's happened. I think he's the kind of guy who he's going to vulture a win off of a crash up front, right? Or some sort of technical snafu, but with the leaders, I think he's that kind of driver. Like that is a vibe check. You have great evidence, super technical knowledge of how they've done and where he's come from. I'm just going to go on vibes. I think Piastri gets it because I've seen a lot of Norris, all right? And I've seen what he's done. And I think Norris is like a top 6 driver, right? And I think he can consistently put himself there. I think Piastri is the kind of guy he's lightning in a bottle. And I think at one point he's going to get out.
Yeah, I want to know who Tyler. I want to know who Tyler thinks. He's got to break this deadlock here. Let's go.
I am going to agree with Spencer. I think Piastri, the maturity that he has, and not that Lando doesn't, it's going to be one of the best things to watch over the remainder of the season after the break. You guys talk about those measuring points, and it's always teammates are the easiest for us to do it. And I think Piastri, the maturity, like he had said, when he was breaking down the sprint race with Max, and he just knew, hey, I don't have a chance here. But I agree with Spencer. I think he's going to have an opportunity to vulture. I like the term that you said there, vulture a race. And I love the kid's maturity, but more so, I love when McLaren is good, it's better. You guys look at qualification, and I would wager to say this was the first qualification, and granted, McLaren's finally got on that level, but that we saw Q3, it was all 2 drivers from the 5 top teams. There was no mix-up, so it was like the big dogs are eating. Everybody's out here, and we get to watch it. So watching McLaren and watching those 2, is McLaren the best driver pairing on the grid right now?
I mean, it's definitely a strong one. I would say when we enter next season, I would probably put it up there with, the likes of Russell and Hamilton. I still think that driver pairing is the strongest on the grid. Obviously, you've got 7-time Formula One world champion and Lewis Hamilton. And then on the flip side of that, you've got George Russell, who again is kind of that top talent that's, when Lewis calls it a day and decides to leave Formula One, that's going to be, George Russell, who's going to probably slide into that number 1 spot at the team. But yeah, it is a great conversation because of how strong this driver pairing is turning out to be. And I'm actually, I'm really excited to see these 2, push each other a little bit more, and then once they start to get that performance gap even closer to Red Bull, to see the sparks kind of fly behind the scenes if it happens.
Yeah, it feels like you're making we're making a current status projection forward bet, right? Like, okay, well, right now it's these 2. Like, I would fully agree it's Hamilton and Russell. But if I am grocery shopping for next year and I want a take that's going to keep, McLaren feels like that's the one with the most upside, because what Piastri has is really thrilling. He could be truly great. And then you have Lando Norris, who we also haven't seen the ceiling on. Like, both of them still have room to grow in terms of performance and in terms of experience. So like, I that's my half answer. I'm going to cheap out and make 2 answers. I think you're right. But I think if you're projecting forward, McLaren is the most intriguing.
Let's focus on Mercedes a little bit in the week that they had. Obviously, we haven't dove into Red Bull yet. 1-2 there, but you look at the standings, Hamilton 4th, Russell 6th. They get those 2 drivers up there, and Mercedes is going to go into the summer break clearly number 2. Now, that is not up to their expectations and the expectations that they have, but still a good week for Mercedes to go out there, get a good points haul.
Yeah, but especially considering that both of them are running, different rear wings on the car, and somehow they're able to eke out a ton of performance out of this thing. I think, obviously with the direction that they decided to take at the beginning of the season, and then obviously everything that they've had to do since then to try and just claw back performance, I think honestly for Mercedes to be where they are right now is absolutely incredible. I mean, that car was absolutely nowhere at the beginning of the season, and then this big change that came at Monaco with the upgrade, they've done an extremely impressive job to turn this car around and to get Lewis Hamilton, comfortable within the car again. And I think that's a big thing right there. And then if we look at George Russell, I mean, you can see that it's kind of dropped away a bit for George. And I think the car has gone a little bit more in the direction of Lewis and what he can do with a race car. But I think at the end of the day, Spencer, just looking at this, like, Mercedes has done a remarkable job.
I think they really have, Tim, but I think they're damned by their consistency. We don't see a lot of, they're not a very dramatic team. They don't have these big swings. We just spent a lot of time talking about McLaren because they've had this big swing, and that's very exciting to watch. Mercedes, look at a race. There's little complaints. George Russell inevitably has some sort of tire switch or problem that, he loses 10 spots, but then makes up 11, and they end up being 5th. That's it. They sort of average being, 4th or 5th, right? They finished 4-6 today. They are so consistent given everything that they've done. So what they've done is quietly excellent. There's little problems, there's disadvantages, there's little ticks every single race, and they managed to just sail through it. If they get this car right next year with that kind of consistency and performance, they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. again, even yes, with a slightly diminished Lewis Hamilton, who's still better than 99% of drivers in the world.
Spencer, you said the word drama, and there's plenty of drama to talk about this week. Ferrari is usually drama. Alpine, there's plenty of drama. I have one last question. Here's the $1 million question for me with Mercedes. Is Mercedes the best bet to break this Red Bull streak? Is that the team that you think, whether it be Hamilton or Russell coming off the break, does Mercedes get a win? Are they the team most positioned to break that streak?
Yeah, I think they are, only because of the consistency factor over the past, 5-6 races that we've seen them. They've been consistently sort of there and hanging around. And then obviously we've seen that Red Bull can be beaten qualifying with Hamilton's pole position at the Hungarian Grand Prix. Now, which driver that's going to be, whether it's going to be George Russell or Lewis Hamilton, I mean, who knows at the end of the day. I think by the time we roll along to October, I think we're probably going to be seeing that performance gap within the race start to be pulled back a bit more. And I just think that team's going to be Mercedes, just simply because of the turnaround that we've seen from them so far, and the infrastructure that they have to work with is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I will always bet on Goliath, and Mercedes is very much Goliath, right? Like, I think we sometimes forget that historically speaking, Red Bull is, despite recent performances, still an upstart in the sport, and Mercedes, given that run that they had with Lewis over the past 10 years prior to Red Bull's turn at the wheel in front, it's very hard not to bet on them. They missed bad on a car for 2 years straight. That's not going to happen again. I just can't see it, given everything, that all the money and investment running behind them and all of the experience that they have. They're the easiest bet there.
Well, Christian Horner, Adrian Newey, Helmut Marko, they may have an exception to say to that Goliath comment, but we're breaking down the Belgian GP. We are now halfway through the season. Tyler Denning, Spencer Hall, Tim Hauraney, and guys, just to run through the order one more time: Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez, Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso, George Russell, Lando Norris, Esteban Ocon, Lance Stroll, and Yuki Tsunoda. Let's talk Ferrari. On the podium, joining the Max Verstappen podcast, as the internet has dubbed it, with Checo Perez, Charles Leclerc. What was the weekend for Ferrari? We see disappointment for Sainz, ultimately retired. Should they have retired him earlier? But what is the status of Ferrari? Okay, give it to me. Is it a pass, fail, or incomplete for Ferrari halfway through the semester right now? Where are we with Ferrari?
I'm going to register an incomplete on that one. I think like where they started the season, and then all of a sudden, they get to Spain and it's like, hey, we're changing the entire aero philosophy of our race car. There's nothing wrong here. Look away. There's nothing wrong. I think at the end of the day, and obviously it's been mentioned on the broadcast ad nauseum, is basically the racing and how the actual tire gets used on this race car, the degradation that they have trouble controlling. At this race in Spa, it actually looked, the tire deg on the Ferrari for this race looked pretty decent. I mean, the delta between Leclerc and Perez, it wasn't that much, but the gap obviously between Perez and Verstappen was like 20 seconds or whatever it was. But that being said, I think Ferrari's making small gains. Should this team be making small gains? No, they should be making massive gains. This is a team that has all of the resources and then all of the infrastructure that they need to build great race cars. But I think when you look internally, you've got Frederick Vasseur there now. He's going to want to put his stamp on a lot of the different projects that are happening within this team. And I think that slows down your development and how you get parts to the car. I think both drivers are fantastic. Charles Leclerc over one lap is absolutely incredible. And I also think on the top of that, I think Carlos Sainz is great when he gets into the races. Obviously not in Spa, but so far this season, he's actually been performing really well in the races. And so, yeah, I think Ferrari at the moment, just a little bit incomplete. So,
Spencer?
That's really charitable. I'd fail them. Just straight up fail them. Y'all should be better than this. That's it. Translate it into Italian however you want. I don't know what y'all is in Italian, but you have to fail them. You should be better than this. You have all of the gifts, all of the resources necessary. We all agree on that. Get it right. So much of what they're doing seems to be detail-oriented work that this team, just made up of some of the best engineers in the world, cannot do. And in the middle of the race, they still have lapses. They still have slow pit stops. They still have little mistakes that keep them from being great. And when you're dealing with a sport that deals in so much precision and it comes down to seconds, those matter. In fact, that's job one. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead, be the tough grader here. I'm going to fail them, come back better.
I'm with you there. I think it's a fail for Ferrari right now. You look, the constructors updated now. Ferrari, they are fourth, 191 points. They are trailing Aston Martin for that battle for third. They have 196 points. If you look over at the driver's standings, you now have Leclerc 99 points, George Russell with 99, and Carlos Sainz with 92. The common theme, guys, it feels like with those other teams, Red Bull, Mercedes, Aston Martin, it's continuity. They've put continuity with their people. They've empowered their people. They've stood behind their people. And Ferrari, continuity does not seem to be the name of the game. That word does not mesh with the Ferrari ethos right now. And it seems to show in the up down that they have across the season thus far.
Yeah, I agree. I think like when we take a look at that infrastructure and team personnel, like we've been kind of alluding to here, it's that, obviously the turnover in team personnel hasn't been good for them this season. Obviously with Laurent Meki's now gone, he's going to be at AlphaTauri for next season, as their team principal. And then you look at other key figures behind the scenes that have also moved on from the Ferrari program. I think, letting Mattia Binotto go as early as they did, I think that was a bit of a mistake. I mean, if we take a look at last season, some of the biggest errors came down to the strategic department. And since that turnover from Mattia Binotto to Fred Vasseur, there's still, from my understanding, hasn't been any restructuring within that strategy department, which I think, needs to have a look into and to see what they can do to help or support the department as a whole. So I think when you look at this, there may be just too much turnover happening. And the thing with Formula One is it's all based on years, right, guys? I mean, this is a year sport, so it's not necessarily you make a huge change and you're going to get, success a month later. It usually takes a few years for that to set in.
Spencer, it sounds like we should pass Tim the red marker, the red Ferrari marker, so he can change that incomplete to a fail.
No way.
That sounded like a fail.
Definitely not changing my stance on incomplete, because I think they can come back. I really do.
Yeah, and this is you don't make a glorious mess like Ferrari alone. A mess this big takes a team. You need a lot of people contributing.
It takes a village.
It takes a village to make a mistake this big and colorful. But that said, at times too, the drivers, I understand we have a sort of meme going about Charles Leclerc being this tortured soul. Sometimes he's lost composure. Like that's happened, and I understand it's a sport of passion. You're at high speed. Everybody's very touchy, and honest communication between race engineer and driver is important. But when you have the driver losing composure, both drivers at points, right? Carlos Sainz a bit less from what I've seen. It's an indication of just where your relationships stand. It is somehow, despite all of the machinery involved, as Adrian Newey said in his book, How to Build a Car, it's a people sport. It's a sport of relationships. And the relationships there are not great. Say what you like about Christian Horner, all right, and about how unlikable that man can come across or be at times and how demanding they can be. The relationships at Red Bull are, on the whole, very clear, very well defined, and the standard is the standard. Same at Mercedes when they're functioning at their best. Heck, same at McLaren, right? Like when you look at like who is in charge of what and what the expectations are, I don't always know what those are at Ferrari. They're not very clearly communicated.
You talk relationships. I think one of the most intriguing things we saw over the course of the weekend, Red Bull, that relationship between Max Verstappen and his race engineer, Gianpiero Lombazzi. That was great. You look at Max Verstappen and you would think, is there anybody that can rein this guy in the way that he is performing? But GP was on it constantly throughout qualification. Q2, Max nearly missed out. He was 10th there. And I love what he said. He said, you come up with the run plan. You come up with the strategy. We'll leave it up to you. And then Max afterwards, tempers had flared down. But it's that dynamic. And Spencer, you made the point, Tim, you're obviously well aware of that. It's the knife's edge. You have to be able to walk it and the ability sometimes to go over. But then when you regroup and Red Bull, GP, Christian Horner, Helmut Marko, who's obviously very vocal, Adrian Newey, the whole infrastructure right now, they are able to walk it. And the success that we are now seeing, we're talking historic here. The question now is, could they win every single race this season?
Ooh, that's it. I mean, it almost got done. I believe it was 1988 with the McLaren MP44. I think they almost won every single race except for one. I believe it was like Senna. Don't quote me on this. I think Senna was leading, and then he got taken out by a back marker, and that's essentially what cost them basically running the table that whole season. But regardless of all of that, I mean, when you look how far out ahead in these races that the Red Bull is, I mean, you got to say that they're for sure locked in to win almost every single race this season. If something happens with Verstappen or Perez or both of them during a race when they're either 1-2 or whatever, you've got to think that that's going to be the only thing that's going to set them back from really just running the entire table.
No, they could do it. They really could at this point. We're hoping for like a seagull in an intake. We're hoping for
we've already seen a bird go into Max Verstappen's car.
Oh yeah, I didn't pull that from nowhere.
Yeah.
Right? We're going on things that have already happened here.
You went to a bigger bird. You were going from a small bird to
might need an ostrich.
One.
Yeah, I don't want to see it. It'd be a terrible thing, but that's about the size we'd require to derail them at this point. A tire blowing, an engine just exploding for no reason. That's really what we're talking about in terms of events that will derail Red Bull running the table. I do think everyone will get closer, Tim. I think you're right. I think you've seen that. You've seen the numbers start to gradually creep down between Red Bull and the rest of the sport, right? But I don't know if they can make up that gap, particularly with the driver they've got and with the sort of creative tension. Just to go back to the engineer and the driver sniping at each other, no one in the Red Bull team should get along. Like if you look at them independent of each other, you go, none of these people are easy to get along with or undemanding. And yet all on the same team, aligned correctly, they managed to produce this kind of dominance. That's what everyone is going for, right? Like going back, these are relationships. Everything is so well calibrated there right now that we don't worry about that. We don't hear that on the radio and go, oh man, what's wrong with Red Bull? You go, it's just the boys fighting. That's what makes the machine go.
Well, the machine is going to the tune of 503 points right now in the constructors. It'll be interesting to see the breakdown when they can have the constructors wrapped up by. We may be talking, like 7 races left in the season, but you talk that creative tension, Spencer, and the ability to free speak, to challenge one another. We've seen that with Checo and Max, and you talk the result for Checo. He has the ability. He's leading the race. He finishes second, but Helmut Marko, pretty frank. He said that Sergio Perez has woken up from his championship dream. And I think Checo is very well equipped and suited to be in that seat, because that second Red Bull seat, there's nothing that is hotter than that. They have seat. You guys ever get in the car and you accidentally put the seat warmer on and you just leave it on 3? I do it sometimes with my fiance just to see if she notices that. I feel like that's the Red Bull second seat, is that it is constantly so hot. But Checo and the maturity that he has in order to be able to absorb that and then to get back into the car and to produce that takes a unique personality, and it's another dynamic within there. What are your takes on Checo and that comment about waking up from his championship dream?
Well,
Yeah.
it is that kind of honesty that makes Red Bull work. But let me just say, I don't want to be Helmut Marko's kid, because that's like Helmut Marko watching you play Little League. Guess what? You're getting a frank evaluation, son. You might not be the starting second baseman.
Yeah, maybe why Max Verstappen succeeds, coming from Jos Verstappen and the expectation there a little bit that he has with Helmut. Tim, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, obviously Helmut puts a lot of pressure onto his drivers, right? We've seen him do it in the past with pretty much everybody. And I think at the end of the day for him, it's trying to get the best out of both drivers at all, given times. They need Sergio Perez to get that confidence back. They need Sergio Perez to be at his best, because they don't know what's coming down the pipe in 2024. They don't. And they need a second driver who's going to be able to support Max Verstappen, because in all honesty, guys, this championship is going to be closer next season. These teams are going to make big jumps in performances. It just depends on how big of a jump Red Bull can still make. That's what it all kind of boils down to. But when we look at the driver pairing between these, I mean, it's not even close. I mean, like, Perez was 20 seconds in this race behind. Like, that car obviously built towards Max's driving style, what Max does in a race car. It's quite unique to a lot of what the other drivers do in a race car. And I think for Sergio, it's trying to learn how to get it so he can just get the performance out of it without, teetering over the limit and crashing or ruining tires and things of that nature. So I think for Sergio, it's at this moment, just hang on, try to learn as much as you can, and just try and close down that gap, that delta to your teammate.
Well, and Christian Horner, they have stood behind Perez in spite of all the Daniel Ricciardo talk, that they have been vocal and said, hey, his contract goes through next year. And they had also, you had heard talk, Helmut Marko saying with Nico Hulkenberg, there was a quote about Hulkenberg and how well he is qualified, but Checo's racecraft and his maturity, I think, is a great compliment to Max Verstappen. And we haven't seen that yet, but guys, also Max Verstappen right now, if you look at the numbers, 314 points, he would be leading the constructors standings by himself.
Yeah, it's insane. And I don't think we've given enough credit to Checo for his mental fortitude in enduring all of this, because you say that, yes, they're standing behind Checo Perez and they're encouraging him. Encouragement comes in a lot of different forms. The way Red Bull stands behind drivers, they might have something in their hand besides a paycheck and a thumbs up. Like, a lot of drivers have washed out of this program. A lot of young drivers have been tossed out or bailed out of the Red Bull program. It is a pressure cooker. I have no doubt that what Perez has gone through this year in terms of the psychological pressure is absolutely immense. Helmut Marko, it's on key. It's on brand for what they do. And Perez has managed to weather it. So kudos to him for that.
They stand behind him with one of the cooling fans with the dry ice to try to balance it out. All right, here's the question. I'm quizzing you guys through. This is like our midterm for the season. If you had to put the house on it, Red Bull wins every race this year, yes or no?
Yep.
Yeah, I'll take it. Why not? Who wants to live forever? Go ahead, put it all on there.
Yeah, I'm with you guys there too, because, with two drivers and two cars the way that they are, sure, you have bad luck on some, but I just, it is hard to bet against this team now that has won every race thus far this year. Wow. What a way for Red Bull to go in. We could spend plenty of time talking about it. Do you guys have any thoughts on Max Verstappen and his race today? Were you surprised in the slightest that he was able to power from 6 all the way through, change the gearbox, and say, "No, we can do this"?
Yeah, no way. I mean, he's driving at another level, right, guys? Like, we've seen him kind of elevate himself to peak performance, and I still think there is a ceiling that he's not really even having to touch so far this season. We saw a glimpse of it at the Monaco Grand Prix qualifying in that final sector where he was pushing up against that peak level of Max Verstappen, but we haven't really seen too much of that this season. So, I mean, again, right, he still has another gear left in the gearbox.
Yeah, he's so much more patient. And I know you're afforded that kind of patience when you have a machine that performs this well and when you have that much speed. But even then, this is a very mature, very patient driver at this point. And he was behind and simply reeled everyone in. Even had a little snap late in the race where he says, "Oh, I almost lost it." Done. Processed. Unflappable.
One of the fastest, most dangerous corners in Formula One.
Mm-hmm. Just gassed it. No problem. No, like somebody's in front of him. He's like, "Don't worry, we'll get him." I know part of that's the car, but part of that is gifting Max this sort of maturity that's allowed him to race on another level. And frankly, yeah, this car, they still might be sandbagging. I really think they might be sandbagging because I think it's even faster than they've put on.
Tim, you make the point of the Monaco lap, but you look this weekend in Q3, coming off that dramatic Q2 where it goes down to that final lap, 0.8 of a second. Matt, that may be one of his best quali laps that we have seen. It was such an interesting qualification session, but you want to talk peak Max Verstappen for a car that's not necessarily suited to be a qualification car. 0.8. He blew through the rest of the field.
Yeah, it was absolutely impressive. I love the Monaco Grand Prix qualifying lap just simply because of how much he actually threw it on the line. I got to sit down and talk to him one-on-one about this following that at the Canadian Grand Prix. And he didn't hold back when he said, like, I put everything I had into that lap. And I was kind of like, okay, well, you haven't been doing that all season then? And he kind of didn't really answer the question on that. So I kind of was led to believe, like, hey, that's like what everything this guy in that car actually had. And he was literally, guys, millimeters from absolutely destroying that car. And it's an impressive lap from him. It's one of like my highlights from this season was watching that because of how difficult Monaco is. But when you look at Spa, big commitment track requires big commitment drivers. And obviously Verstappen is that. Now, the question is, if Charles Leclerc hadn't made a tiny little mistake, would he have gotten pole?
Spencer, any final thoughts, Max Verstappen, before we transition?
Other than this, that, yeah, we do sort of have to evaluate every single race based on Red Bull will win but I don't want to skip past that first part because what you're seeing is the kind of stuff that later on we'll make glowing documentaries about. Like we'll make another Senna about this, right? We will make another beautiful story about this because it is a beautiful story for them. It really is. It's dominance. It is historical dominance on an incredible level. That is, to me, the capstone of so many careers all at once. I think this will be the best season that Max Verstappen ever drives, right? Like everyone knows what's coming. I don't think they'll ever be this dominant again. And I don't think Adrian Newey will, be involved with a car that produces like this. I don't think that Christian Horner is going to put together a team this dominant again, or at least I will be very surprised. Don't put it out of the realm of possibility. But, this is not just Verstappen season. It is for so many people at Red Bull, the culmination of decades of work.
Yeah, you know what?
Goliath, maybe.
Spencer makes a really great point here. And I think that is, we need to take a deeper look behind the scenes of what all, Adrian Newey and his staff had to go through to get the car that they've got on the racetrack. If you remember only having 60% wind tunnel CFD design time for this season.
Nuts.
That's nothing, right? And then plus add on top of that, they have a cost cap to battle with. So think of it this way. Every time that they hit the button on the wind tunnel, that's costing them a run. So that's eating into that 60% every time they touch the button. So you have to remember that each time they decide to go into the wind tunnel, put a car in there or a part, they have to execute. The level of execution every time they're in there has to be flawless. They cannot make mistakes at all. They don't have 100% wind tunnel CFD design runtime. They just don't. And so I think for me, looking at how they've put this car together under the constraints that they've had to deal with, it's extremely impressive. Extremely impressive.
Do you guys like poetry?
Love it.
How about this for sports poetry? You have Max Verstappen now with 8 consecutive wins. He will be going to match Vettel's record of 9 consecutive race wins. That happened in 2013. The next race after the break, Zandvoort, Netherlands. There is going to be so much orange smoke.
Mhm.
You may not be able to see the track. Max Verstappen racing at his home GP to equal that record. Do you think he gets it? Do you think he beats it?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. And Tiesto is going to be playing all night long.
Yeah. Listen, go ahead. And if you can go ahead and just like bet, if you're like, typically we do discuss betting on this program. Dalin's not here this week. I'm going to pick up the slack for him. Just go ahead and buy futures in two things: Dutch techno. All right. And flares. If you can buy futures and orange flares, go ahead, because they're going through the roof.
Yes, that'll be fun to watch coming off the break, going to match that record of consecutive race wins. So let's get into a couple quick hitters that we haven't hit yet. Yuki Tsunoda. We were watching the end of the race and we were cheering Yuki. Outside of Checo Perez, there may not be a driver that has faced more pressure in season than Yuki, just with the Daniel Ricciardo and bringing that whole energy in. But Ricciardo now 2 of the 3 qualifications since he's come back. Ricciardo is out qualified, but we all know it comes down to the race. What a day for Yuki Tsunoda to make that case, to say, hey guys, hey Helmet, I'm still here. You know, if that seat, we're talking, year 2, maybe I could be your guy.
I mean, I think like one of the things for Yuki Tsunoda at the beginning of the season, there was a tiny bit of inconsistency again, but this boils down to the car itself and just how truly difficult it was to drive. When they got to the British Grand Prix, they completely overhauled this entire race car. It was a totally different car when I went down to take a look at it from what they began the season with. It was incredible. I think for Yuki, it was like I was saying off the top of the show. I mean, the amount of pressure that I think he's under is not really talked about enough, because he is under a lot of pressure. He is fighting to hold on to this seat for next season and maybe even into the future. And he's done a fantastic job. He really has. Like, he's done an incredible job.
Yeah, I believe going back to Amazing Things, Helmut Marko has said, Helmut Marko, when asked about Tsunoda, I believe earlier this season, said that they were really satisfied with the job he had done. Which Helmut Marko saying that he's really satisfied is basically like anybody else saying, we're elated. We're extremely proud of him, right? That's getting the tough dad to go ahead and say that you did an okay job. That's really what we're talking about. So he is under a tremendous amount of pressure. He's survived an environment that has, yes, washed out a lot of other drivers who bailed or were ejected from that same program. There's also this, AlphaTauri, whether you really understand why they exist or not, right? Like, which is kind of a question sometimes of like, what does AlphaTauri do? How are they relative to Red Bull? What are they used for? Among other things, I think we want to see guys like Yuki and guys like Daniel Ricciardo in, because they're going to get the job done. But at the same time, they're a boon to the sport. They're both interesting. They're both funny. They're both great presences for the sport when it comes to, if you need somebody to appear on social media in an interview, who can we get? Well, Yuki and Daniel are both great. So like, on top of all of that, I'm just glad for him because he's extremely likable and he's taken on, I think, a challenge with very few payoffs on the track and done very well.
Yeah, he's definitely matured over the last couple of years and elevated nicely into that role. Let's wrap up for this week with Aston Martin. Aston Martin, it was, to say the least, a horrible Saturday. The sprint was not kind. Stroll had the crash in SS2, and then Alonso had the mistake going off the curb. He owned up to it, but like I said earlier, it's about the race. It's about Sunday, and you look at what Aston Martin did. Fernando Alonso finishes 5th, and Lance Stroll finishes 9th. So both drivers are in the points. You have to walk away for a team that needed some momentum going into the break. I think they found a little bit.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, it's been, like you had said, it's been challenging for this team really over the past, few races ever since Austria. I mean, I think for this race in particular, they had the car set up at the end of FP1 with the idea of this is what it's going to look like during the race. And so that kind of hampers what you do within, your qualifying and SS1, SS2, SS3, etc., and then into the sprint as well. It mainly focused on the big race on the Sunday. But, it's interesting. I've been speaking with Mike Crack quite a bit this season, who's the team principal at Aston Martin. And on Thursday, he'd made it known that they brought a big upgrade to the Canadian Grand Prix and a few more bits to it over the next gradual few races. It was strong in Canada. Arguably, this car was the second fastest team. The characteristics, to the track at Circuit Gilles Villeneuve, suited the car. It was quite unique in that respect. But once they started going to other tracks, they started noticing the performance drops, and they started seeing that what they're seeing on track is not really correlating with what they're actually doing with the car. So it turns out they've actually brought a lot of parts of this car that haven't sent it in the right direction. They've literally gone off the trail and are trying to find their way back on. And one of the things that they've had to do is through those last 3 races up until Hungary is trying to collect what they call data points to see where this car is actually going. And turns out it has been going well out of the window. So how long will it take to get back in the right direction for them? I mean, they need to understand what they've done wrong. They've done that. Hungary was that data point that I had mentioned, and then confirming all of that. And then the characteristics of the car suiting the AMR 23. I think for this team as a whole, we're going to see developments that are going to be aggressive, I would say, over the second half of this season to address the areas that they've kind of steered the ship in the wrong direction. So I think for them, by the time we get to Zandvoort, they're going to have a big upgrade. By the time we get to the next race, they're going to keep upgrading because they still do have a good budget left to develop this car pretty hard.
Yeah, it's a big move this week for Lance Stroll. I just think Lance Stroll continues to need to build that confidence. Like that's one thing, the inconsistency, because the story has been Fernando Alonso, and at the same time we look back and you get the same kind of inconsistencies out of Lance Stroll, and that leads to the dangerous question of what happens when the number 2 driver is also the son of one of the primary stakeholders in your team. And I think that question becomes a bit less sensitive if we can consistently get top 10 finishes. Okay, might be 9th, might be 10th. Get some points, make yourself known, and don't bring up the big ugly question about Aston that involves a bunch of off-track stuff. Okay, keep it on the track. Let's go ahead, get some consistency.
I'm not going to touch that one. Yes, that is the elephant.
No, yes, that's a big question
for Aston Martin. Here's my question to you guys with Aston Martin. You look at the driver standing: Fernando Alonso, 149 points. Lewis Hamilton nipping at his heels, 148. The constructors right now also very close. Aston Martin in third, 196 points to Ferrari's 191. So does Fernando and do Aston Martin finish the season in third?
Ooh. I think if they're, it is tough. I think if they're able to kind of get this thing back on track, get this development program back on track, I think they can battle for third. But I think also we have to remember, Ferrari's starting to kind of get it together here. McLaren certainly has gotten it together, and they have more performance coming to this race car over the next few races as well once we get out of the summer break. I think it's going to be definitely a battle for them to just hold on to that either third or fourth position in the constructor standings.
I think it's going to be tough, and I think it's pretty much going to come down to Stroll in terms of consistent performance for Stroll, because I know Alonso and I know where he's going to be. It's whether the number 2 driver can go ahead and maintain this level of performance. And I think with Ferrari coming on, and I think with maybe the moonshot of McLaren getting super hot, and yes, getting more performance, like Tim said, over the second half of the race. This is our producer before the race said something really intriguing. So let's give David Presley his dues. Let's give him his propers. He said, if it weren't for Red Bull, we would be having one of the most interesting and exciting seasons in recent Formula One history. And he's right. There are so many teams that are so close in the standings and in terms of on-track performance, and with a lot of drama between drivers and teams. And I think that race is still there. It's not quite as interesting given Red Bull's dominance. But when we say who's going to be first, there's no drama whatsoever. When we say who's going to be third, all of a sudden, I have no clue. Absolutely no clue. So I'm going to go ahead and say that Aston doesn't counterpunch quite as well as the other teams. I don't think they have as many moves left, which is fine. That's really, if you told Aston that they'd be here, we say this every week. If we told Aston they'd be here at the beginning of the season, they'd be thrilled. They should still be thrilled. I don't know if they can hold on to third given how much is coming from other teams.
You're saying that Aston Martin is no Terrence Crawford if you watched the fight last night.
Correct.
And how he counterpunched. All right. And you also said drama. There was no more drama. The epicenter of drama was Alpine. You look at a mid-season coaching change in the NFL. If you fire your coach 8 weeks in, wow, we're going into the summer break. Otmar Safnauer is out the door. There was so much drama for Alpine, but then they put Gasly on the podium in the sprint and they scored points in the race with Esteban Ocon. Alpine results were pretty good, all things considered.
I mean, you don't make a structural change that big and then all of a sudden things start to change. It doesn't necessarily work that way. I mean, Alpine has let go some huge names here and let one guy who's massive just walk away to Williams. I mean, letting go Otmar Safnauer is a big thing. Like, this guy, you have to remember what he's done at Force India, Racing Point, right? You remember back in, what was it, 2018, when Force India went into receivership, and then Lawrence Stroll rescued the team from that. He was literally having to try and keep folks from leaving the team because he couldn't pay them. They didn't have any money, right? They almost closed the doors on that team, and he had to keep this thing alive, and he did. And that was a team that really punched above their weight with the amount of resources that they had, zero. So now you come over to Alpine, a team that is rich with resources. It takes time to really turn the internals of a team around. And then you let a guy like, Alan Permane go. That guy has been at Alpine for over 30 years. Like, he is a well-respected guy in the paddock. He knows his stuff. Pat Fry, same with him. You just let him walk away. I think Alain Prost laid it out pretty good for everybody in his article that he wrote in L'Equipe. Like, I think essentially with the article that I really pulled from that was obviously Alain really laying into Laurent Mekies, but at the same time, I think making it known that you can't run a Formula One team with, big OEMs trying to control everything. It's just too much, right? I think you need racing people to run racing teams. We alluded to this actually earlier with Red Bull and Mercedes. You look at Christian Horner, he's not only the team principal, he's also, president, CEO, Red Bull Racing, right? That's important, I think, because you keep that upper management structure very small, so you don't get a lot of confusion that bleeds down throughout the team. And I think one of those things is happening at Alpine, and Alain did draw a direction towards that. If you go back to 2005, 2006, when, Renault was really kicking some butt, right? Fernando Alonso winning the world championships. That was a small, tight package team. You had Flavio Briatore running the show, and then you had a small group internal, and then you had your key driver in Fernando Alonso running the ship.
Laurent Rossi, not Mekies, Laurent Rossi, correct?
Sorry.
But to your point, Spencer, you had said with Adrian Newey, this is a people business. And that's what Prost had come out and said. It was a lack of humanity towards other people.
Yeah, and not just that. When you talk about humanity, it means a lot of different things. It means that you have respect for what they do, and part of that respect is empowering people to do the job that they do, to trust the racing people, to trust the people who understand the challenge ahead. That is something that Alpine has obviously struggled with. I think we've seen in every variation of Alpine, right? Kudos to the drivers for showing up in all of this chaos. I know they're handsomely compensated for that. I know it's a privilege to hold one of those seats, but at the same time, it can't be easy knowing that you've done this. We've all done this. Shown up to an office and gone, I don't know who's in charge. I don't know what's happening this week. I don't know who's going to be here next week.
Did you see the quote from Otmar? You can't get 9 women pregnant and hope to have a baby in a month. Wow. Tim, you're plugged in. We've heard some names floated out there. Mattia Binotto. But is that the guy? It feels like Alpine, this is so structurally flawed that there's just so much at play. What are you hearing? What's your take on them riding the ship?
Yeah, the rumor is Mattia Binotto could come in after his gardening leave is done with Ferrari, but it was interesting. A lot of reporters at Spa this weekend really put it to Bruno Femin, who at the moment is the intern team principal, and he couldn't really come up with an answer. Like, it's almost like he Like he didn't even know like what the next sort of steps are. When you're running a giant Formula One team, you always need to have your backup plan. Who is going to be your backup person who you're going to put in this big time role to run the team? And so for them to not have that answer or to be able to even talk about it is a little concerning.
It is. I do have some good news if you're an Alpine fan out there. If you've managed to make it through all of this, help is on the way. Because I know that if Ryan Reynolds is involved with the franchise, as he now is, as at least a part investor, 25% share through his holding company, along with other investors, if he's involved with the franchise, it's going to run for 10 years. It's going to be very successful, and it's going to have consistent results, okay? It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, Wrexham, FC, and hopefully now Alpine.
Hold on, Tyler. Hold on.
Hold on.
Wait. If you're Ryan Reynolds, I'm sorry. If you're Ryan Reynolds, Tyler, what are you doing when you see this? If you've seen everything that's gone down, what are you doing?
Guys, you need to go further back, Spencer, because I'm talking Van Wilder. Wilder, that is the guy that is going to help resurrect this team. Absolutely. Van Wilder, if he could graduate college,
Deadpool,
he can do it.
Right? Mythic Quest. Don't sleep on Mythic Quest. We're going to ignore Green Lantern. This won't be Green Lantern. Okay, but I'm just saying a 25% share. Somebody who's had an extensive record of franchise-based successes might be a reason for some optimism.
Okay, we're going to close the book on the first half here, but let's close the book on Spa. I have a quick 2 questions for you guys. Eau Rouge, do you know what it means in English?
Is it Red River?
Red water.
Red water, yeah.
It's named after the iron-infused stream of water that runs underneath the track. And guys, we love the racing here at Spa. I think it needs to be said. We want to continue to see racing here at Spa, safe racing as well. Here is the last question. Belgian beers, Belgian waffles, or Belgian chocolate? You got to you take one. Which one are you taking?
I'm a food guy. I'm going with the waffles, man.
Belgian waffles. What do you got, Spencer?
Beer. You knew I was going to say that, but yeah, I'm gonna go Belgian beer, because a waffle's just going to make me sleepy. With a beer, I can have another beer.
138 Michelin starred restaurants in Belgium. So that will put a bookend on the first half of the season. So let's go high level. What are your favorite moments? Give me 2 or 3 from the first half of the year thus far.
I would say I mentioned Monaco. That qualifying performance from Max. I'm gonna definitely stick with that. And then so far, like the races that I've gotten to go to and work at, it's been absolutely fantastic. Great experiences. Learned a lot. Really, really enjoying it. I mean, even getting to do this is for me, that's a great moment.
I'm gonna say, let's see. I enjoy any Max qualifying lap where he has to try. So I think that's where he has to really actually put it all on the line. That to me is the most thrilling part of the season thus far. I am a fan of any Martin Brundle grid walk. They put Martin out there every week with no help, no support, and no script. And all the man does is make some of the most accidentally hilarious television in the world. Shouts out to Martin Brundle for that. And I've also enjoyed, as always, picking somebody and watching them struggle against circumstances they can't control. Alex Albon. I have enjoyed watching Alex Albon race for Williams because he consistently puts that car as far as humanly possible up the track as anyone in the world can do. Shouts out to the unheralded and I think underappreciated Alex Albon for outstanding performance in a car that is not equal to the driver's quality.
That was like an Academy Award right there. Outstanding performance in car that's not equal to the quality of the driver. I think that the coolest moment for me thus far this season was watching Lando Norris lead at Silverstone. The way that the crowd reacted, it just, there's arguably no better crowd, the home of racing, and to see that British crowd just storm up when you take away the Max Verstappen, that was one of the coolest moments to watch. But for Max Verstappen as well, you can't talk this season. And just to the other point there is people don't appreciate dominance sometimes because it can get monotonous or we get bored with it. But when we get to bear witness to greatness in any sport, sometimes if you can take a step back and just say, look, I really need to, and we need to, as fans, appreciate it, whether you like it or not, whether you're a Red Bull fan or not, appreciating that greatness. Guys, they've won every single race, every single sprint this year thus far.
Mm-hmm.
Incredible. I mean, it's like we have been gushing about them so far for a lot of this show, right? It's just they've been absolutely fantastic, and it's kind of like, what are they going to do next? That's what I'm curious about. What's going to happen next?
There is a treat waiting at the end of this too. And greatness, we say, gets monotonous and boring, but there is a payoff, because when they finally lose a race and someone else wins, the heat off that, the crowd pop off that in wrestling terms is going to be massive. So just know, it's not monotony. It's investment on a future timeline, which will be extremely satisfying.
You guys like what we've seen thus far, the new formats, what we've seen with qualification and trying with ATA, and then we've seen 3 sprint races thus far. The reviews on that, thumbs up, 2 thumbs up, 1 thumbs up. Where you at?
I don't mind the sprint races. I think we can do away with the sprint shootout. I like the fact that the sprint, last year really meant something, where this year I just don't get that. I don't get that same feeling with it.
Yeah, I'm a fan of this. I'm a fan of the sprints, but I don't really like taking attention away from qualifying, particularly in a year like this, where you have somebody who qualifying might be the only drama we get, realistically speaking. So I'm less of a fan than I would be in other years. I don't even know if that's necessarily the formatting or F1's fault for trying it in this particular year, but it doesn't work as well when you take it away from a pure, Saturday quali, Sunday race setup, because Red Bull's out there, man. Red Bull's out there, and chances are they're going to be running first.
Yeah, they're impressive in that. So let's talk summer break. They get to chill. Who do you think most right now, whether it be driver, team, needs a summer break, some time away?
Honestly, I think a lot of the probably team personnel need a bit of a break. I mean, it has been a very big packed schedule for them traveling the world so far. And I think for sure they need that. In terms of maybe a team taking a break and a bit of a reset, I think Aston Martin is probably one of those teams that maybe this break could come at the right moment for them to have that reset and then get back to attacking when we get to Zandvoort.
Yeah, shouts out to the people who actually put the shipping containers on the boats. They need the rest most, because they are moving from continent to continent without much rest in between. In terms of a driver who I believe needs the work, hey, shouts out to all my 40+ people. Fernando Alonso, not because he's flagging, but because I know that man appreciates a nap. So go take a couple, Fernando. You've done really well. Go ahead, get some dad naps in, come back, do it again.
Okay, so here's the constructors right now. Red Bull 503, that's gone. Mercedes 247, Aston Martin 196, Ferrari 191, McLaren 103, and then there's a big drop to Alpine, Williams, Haas, Alfa Romeo, and AlphaTauri. What team coming back from summer break has the biggest amount of pressure on them to have results and to exceed what they've done in the first half?
Yeah, I'm going to take Aston Martin on that one as well, considering how they looked like they were shot out of a cannon at the beginning of the season. And then obviously with the trouble that they've had with their upgrades and sort of sliding back down the grid now, I think for them, it's important to finish in that top 3, top 4. I think if they drop out of that, I think it could be a really big disappointment for them.
I think that is a great answer. I think Ferrari is also a competitor here because this is when you see, going back to relationships, this is when you see new management really start to crank down on some of these issues. And I think you see fatigue and pressure really start to mount in a team that had better expectations than this and should, by all means.
What about Mercedes, guys? I think that the gap right now with Mercedes, and did I miss something? Do we have a Lewis Hamilton contract signed yet. I'm not saying, but
Same one.
I'm not saying, but Mercedes and is the impetus going to the second half saying, okay, we're going to try to build some momentum, or is it we just punt on the rest of the season and development and the thoughts are towards how do we be better at the start of next year? Because obviously this is not up to the standard that Mercedes has set, albeit incredibly high.
Yeah, hearing from Total Wolff, yesterday, it really seemed like they were still going to keep attacking, the rest of this season. I think for Mercedes, ever since Monaco and they've gone in this new aero philosophy direction that they've gone in, it really, they don't seem to me too pressured. Speaking to the team quite often as I do, they actually seem like this is a process that we have to chip away at throughout the season, and to take focus and pressure off of themselves. I think it's for them is like, hey, look, we might not be able to catch Red Bull, but internally we need to see what our performance can be to the fullest with this car that we currently have.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. They just seem so consistent at this point. Like I think they've found something close to their ceiling, and I think they will continue to go ahead and get data, run well, and continue to refine what they've done for this season while doing all the back end stuff looking toward 2024, which Toto has been very frank about from the jump, from very early in the season, talking about what this year means. I don't think anyone's under any illusions. I think they're all working off the same page and working pretty well.
Hey guys, final question on the midterm here, and then there is an extra credit one as well. The question is, which race are you looking forward to the most out of the remainder of races? And then the extra credit, how do you guys intend to spend your summer breaks?
I'm looking forward to, I'm going to say 2, because I love Japan. Like, Suzuka is awesome, and I love seeing these cars there. So I'm going to say Suzuka for sure, in Las Vegas. I think that's going to be pretty wild, eh, Spencer?
Yeah, no, one answer, it's Vegas. That's it. And not even because I think it's necessarily going to be a great track. I am just looking forward to the carnival coming to town, in the town where the carnival never leaves. Like that's what you're talking about. It's going to be a spectacle. I think it's going to be a spectacular television set for a race. I have no idea what it's going to be like in person.
I'm the teacher, so I get to answer however I want. I look forward to Singapore under the lights. It's going to look amazing. Vegas is going to look amazing under the lights. And here in Austin, this is my hometown. I get to take you guys in. It's going to be great to host everybody, see everybody in person, have some barbecue, really enjoy the Texas flair. So finally, upcoming project socials. What are you guys working on summer break? The extra credit question.
I'm working on a piece right now for TSN, so our sports center in Canada, on Ferrari. So we have a big piece coming out in lead up to the Italian Grand Prix. Also got to spend quite a bit of time with Fernando Alonso, so I'm working on a written feature based around Fernando, and then obviously, it's going to be keep pumping forward with my podcast, Nailing the Apex, and going to take a week off for sure. Definitely taking a week off.
What you got, Spencer?
I work double duty, so there's no vacation for me. You can continue to follow what I do with F1, with DNF, with Jessica Smetana, wherever you get your podcast. In addition to that, you can subscribe to what we do over at Channel 6. That's our newsletter. That'll be a lot of college football coming up. I juggle. So like the Austin race, man, that is me working at 150% of reactor capacity, because it is a football weekend and it is an F1 weekend. I'm not even going to try on the Vegas weekend to pay attention to both. I'm not. It's just go ahead, sign off, see what happens at the end of the week. But those are all of the places you can find me. Oh, and Debatable here on this fine network, on ESPN's YouTube channels and wherever you get your socials, which I will be on tomorrow.
I caught you on that the other day, and when you're here, we'll be able to debate my Texas Longhorns going to the SEC. They'll have played Alabama by then, so we can kind of flesh that out. Tim, this is college football talk.
Oh yeah,
you know how it is for us Americans down here. So in the meantime, across the 4-week break, definitely stay tuned, stay locked to Unlap, keeping you abreast with everything that's going on across the break. But we are halfway through the season. Belgian GP has wrapped it up. Red Bull emphatic. They have won every race. Max Verstappen alone would be leading the constructors, but there is still plenty to watch in the second half of the season. So stay with us. Enjoy your break. For Spencer, for Tim, Tyler, we will take a break. We're going to enjoy it ourselves, work on the tan, maybe hit the pool a little bit, but we will be back and ready to roll for the second half of the season. Thanks so much for joining us for this Belgian GP post-race show.